Okay, today we're going to take a brief look at Mexico's history. The first thing we're going to do is talk about some of its early civilizations, and then we'll discuss the European colonization and how that led to the government they have today. Now, the first major civilization we'll discuss is the Olmec civilization. Now, they exist around 1500 BC, so that was well over 3,000 years ago. And they built lots of temples and pyramids, several statues that had large faces carved into them. But they were a very simple group, and they lived in small communities, not one large empire. And in these small communities, they farmed, and that's how they obtained most of their food. And this group was found in eastern Mexico. These pictures here show you some of the things the Olmec were able to create. Now, the pyramids look very different than the Egyptian pyramids, and we'll look at more of those later on this year. But instead of having the peak at the top, the point, these Olmec pyramids had a flat top to them. And the statue you see to the right are some of the faces they would carve into their pyramids. The second major civilization we'll discuss are the Maya. Now, the Maya existed between 250 to 800 AD. That's when the peak of their empire was reached. But they lived in the tropical rainforests near the southeastern part of Mexico. Now, this group lived as one big empire. And as you can see in this painting, kind of depicting everyday Mayan life, their structures were a little more sophisticated than that of the Olmec. The people that were more common wore kind of more simpler clothing, whereas the people higher in society wore clothing that had lots of color, lots of decoration to them. But these people also grew lots of crops on hillsides. But their civilization collapsed around 800 due to three factors. One was diseases that we can treat and prevent today, but they didn't have those medicines back at that time, and that technology. Famine, which means extreme hunger. So some droughts occurred, a lot of crops were not able to be planted, and a lot of people died off from hunger. And the last one was due to war. So those three factors kind of wiped out the Mayan civilization. And the third major civilization were the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs existed around 1200 AD, so they developed 400 years after the Mayans. They conquered other native groups, added them to their empire, and actually had a pretty sophisticated way of life. They had a tax system where people had to pay taxes, very similar to what we do today. But unlike what we do today, in order to please their gods, they would usually sacrifice people, which means they would kill people to please their gods. I don't know how that pleases gods, but, I wasn't an Aztec, so it's just what they believed in. Now, they did grow lots of crops, just like the other civilizations did, but the ending of their society was different than the others. Now, the Aztec civilization was wiped out thanks to a Spanish explorer known as a conquistador named Hernán Cortés. Now, in 1519, Cortés and his men arrived, and he had over 600 men, so several ships sailed in, and he met up with the Aztecs. Now, in the Aztecs' religion, it was prophesied that one of their gods would come to Earth in human form, and he would come, like the clouds would bring him in, he would arrive, and he would be like bright and shiny and just reflect light, and he would be like a half-man, half-beast type creature. Well, Cortés kind of fit all of those versions of the prophecy. The ships they sailed in on, the big white sails kind of looked like clouds. The metallic armor he was wearing reflected light, so he was kind of illuminated and shiny like what a god might look like. And he arrived on a horse, so they thought he was a half-man, half-beast, because horses did not exist in this area at that time. So he came into the area, the Aztecs believed that he was their god, and Cortés was very easily able to conquer them. Now, these Spanish conquistadors were looking for three things that all started with the letter G whenever they came to this continent, this new world as they called it. The first one was gold. They were looking for the rumored large amounts of gold that were all over this area. The second G, they were doing this for glory. They wanted all the fame and recognition that came with exploring new lands and setting up new colonies. And the last one, they were doing this for God. That's the last G. The Spanish were wanting to spread Christianity across this new world. Now, thanks to the diseases that Cortés and his men brought over from Europe, The Aztecs got very sick, and most of them were killed off just from simple diseases that they'd never come into contact with before. Their bodies didn't know how to fight off these diseases, and they died pretty easily. Now Cortez claimed this land in the name of Spain, and it became known as New Spain. And during this time period, Spain started to rule, created major colonies, and you had a blending of culture between people. So people of mixed European and Indian ancestry were known as mestizos. And once the slave trade was brought into this area, people of mixed European and African ancestry became known as mulattoes. The Spanish set up several churches all across this area, and they were called missions. And it also kind of acted as a fortress for militaries to stay. But these missions, their main goal was to convert the local native Indians to Christianity. So they kind of forced their culture and religion upon these people, and eventually they did convert, and that's why Christianity is so big across North and South America today. Now in the early 1800s, the Spanish colonists were getting tired of Spanish rule, just like how the English colonists were getting tired of British rule, and then we fought for independence. The people of New Spain did the same. And in 1821, they gained independence. And a few years after that, Texas broke away from Mexico in its own fight for independence, and then Texas became a republic before becoming a U.S. state. By the early 1900s, a lot of people in Mexico were growing unhappy with the leadership. Over the past several decades, Mexico had lost land to the United States in a few battles, and in 1910, the Mexican Revolution started, and this fighting lasted off and on until 1920. Something that happened because of this was that there was major reforms in the government. Mexico government officials started giving up land that the government had owned and giving it back to the people. They had a restructure in their government, and today they have a democracy, just like us. They have the 3 branches of government, similar to what we have, and they do have a president in which the people elect. So that's a brief overview of Mexican history. Tomorrow we'll take a look at the different regions of Mexico and the characteristics that go along with them.